Ladies and gentlemen, gather round, for I am about to tell you a tale not of mere fact, but of spirit. A story that could only be told with the soaring soundtrack, the dramatic pauses, and the heart-thumping intensity of a classic Japanese anime. This is the complete life story of Goto Ryuji. Imagine, if you will, the opening sequence. Not with an explosive clash of titans, but with a gentle, almost whispered melody played on a solitary piano. The camera, as if carried on a soft spring breeze, pans down from a sky of watercolor blue, over rolling green hills, and settles on a small, unassuming town nestled in a valley. This is Kaze no Sato, the village of the wind. Our story, the epic saga of Goto Ryuji, begins not with a roar, but with the quiet, persistent rhythm of a heart learning to beat for a dream. This is the episode 1 inch of his life, and like all the best first episodes, it is painted in the deceptively simple hues of daily life. We meet our protagonist, Ryuji, not as a warrior, but as a boy. A boy with hair as dark as a raven's wing and eyes that hold a peculiar, distant light, the kind of eyes that seem to be looking at a horizon only he can see. He is, by all accounts, ordinary. He rushes out the sliding door of his traditional wooden home, a piece of toast clenched in his mouth, his school uniform slightly rumpled. He's late, again. His mother's chiding voice follows him into the lane, a familiar and comforting soundscape to his mornings. This is the slice of life portion of our anime, the foundational bedrock upon which every future explosion of power and moment of heroic resolve will be built. We see him in his classroom, doodling intricate designs in the margins of his notebook instead of taking notes on historical dates. The designs aren't of robots or monsters, but of intricate clockwork, of theoretical engine schematics, of wings. His teacher's voice is a distant drone, and the world outside the window, with its clouds shaped like possibilities, is far more compelling. He is not a delinquent, nor is he a genius. He is a dreamer, and in the structured world of his small town, that is often synonymous with being a little bit odd. His afternoons are his own. While other kids gather for soccer or kendo practice, Ryuji takes the winding path up to the bluffs overlooking the town. This is his sacred place, his training ground long before he ever knew what training was. Here, the wind is constant, a living entity that whispers secrets through the tall Sasuke grass. He would spend hours here, watching the way the hawks circled on thermal currents, their flight a perfect, effortless dance with the sky. He'd feel the wind push against his open palms, a tangible, invisible force he yearned to understand, to command. His dream was not born from a traumatic event. There was no destroyed city, no fallen parent to avenge. It was a seed planted by the endless, beckoning blue of the sky, watered by the whispers of the wind, and nurtured in the quiet solitude of his own heart. He didn't want to fight, he wanted to fly. He wanted to break the gentle, but firm, gravitational pull of Kaze no Sato, not because he hated it, but because he loved it enough to want to see what lay beyond its protective embrace, to find something wonderful to bring back. Of course, a protagonist is nothing without his supporting cast, the friends who form his Nakama, from the very beginning. There was Kenji, the boisterous and loyal best friend, built like a young sumo wrestler, whose dream was to inherit his family's ramen shop and create the perfect bowl of noodles. He was the anchor, the grounding force who would drag Ryuji out of his head and back into the world of shared laughter and steaming bowls of food. Your head is always in the clouds, Ryuji, Kenji would laugh, slapping him on the back with a force that nearly sent him stumbling. Come on, my mom made dango. And then there was Yuki. With hair like spun silk and a quiet intelligence that saw through every one of Ryuji's clumsy excuses, she was the childhood friend who held a special, unspoken place in his heart. While Kenji provided the comic relief, Yuki provided the quiet belief. She was the one who would find his discarded, wind-smudged sketches and carefully smooth them out, preserving them. She was the one who would listen, truly listen, as he stumbled over his words, trying to explain the feeling the wind gave him, a feeling of boundless, terrifying, and beautiful freedom. She never told him it was impossible. She simply asked, "What will you do when you get up there?" Her faith was a silent, steady fuel for his ambition. We see the small, seemingly insignificant moments that forge a hero's spirit. The time a younger Ryuji tried to build a giant kite from old bed sheets and bamboo, only to see it torn to shreds by a gust of wind. He didn't cry. He sat there, amidst the tattered fabric, analyzing the break points, his young mind already working on a stronger design. We see him defending a smaller child from a bully, not with his fists, which were scrawny and ineffective, but with a stubborn, unyielding refusal to back down, a glint of something hard as steel in his otherwise dreamy eyes. It was a moral courage that preceded any physical prowess. The conflict in these early days was not against a villain, but against the gentle, suffocating pressure of conformity. It was the well-meaning adults who said, "Be practical, Ryuji. Focus on your studies. Take over your father's shop." It was the feeling of his small world slowly closing in, the walls of the valley feeling less like protection and more like a cage. The monster of the week was the mundane, the ordinary, the easy path laid out before him. His battle was to keep that fragile dream alive against the slow erosion of reality. And then, the inciting incident. The moment the plot, with a capital P, finally notices our hero. It wasn't a meteor strike or a demon invasion. It was a flyer, a simple piece of paper, tacked to the community board, fluttering in the very wind Ryuji loved so much. It advertised the Tengan Academy for Aeronautical Engineering, a prestigious school in the distant, glittering metropolis, a world away from Kaze no Sato. It was a gateway, a call to adventure. He stood there, the paper trembling in his hand, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The dream, once a vague and distant star, had suddenly crystallized into a path. A difficult, terrifying, and nearly impossible path. He looked from the flyer, to his small town, to the faces of Kenji and Yuki, and then up to the endless sky. The quiet piano melody of his life swelled, introducing the first, tentative notes of a full orchestra. The title card for his life was about to appear on the screen. The boy from the village of the wind was about to answer the call, and his journey to become the legend we know, Goto Ryuji, had truly begun. The call had been answered. The application, a desperate prayer sent into the universe, had been accepted. For Goto Ryuji, leaving Kaze no Sato was like a satellite being torn from its gentle orbit, hurled into the cold, vast, and terrifying expanse of deep space. The Tengan Academy wasn't just a school, it was a citadel of polished metal and roaring engines, a world of prodigies who spoke in the complex language of physics and calculus that Ryuji had only ever doodled in the margins of his notebooks. He was a country sparrow who had stumbled into an aviary of engineered hawks, and the imposter syndrome was a heavier burden than any suitcase he had carried from home. His first weeks were a montage of struggle, not set to an inspirational rock track, but to a soundtrack of muffled failures and silent panic. In the simulator, his intuitive, feel-based approach, born from the winds of his bluffs, was useless against the cold, hard logic of flight dynamics. His designs, which he thought were brilliant, were returned slashed with the red ink of a stern instructor. The other students, children of engineers and pilots, formed their own cliques, their conversations a fortress he couldn't breach. He was alone, adrift, and the dream that had once shone so brightly was now flickering, threatening to be extinguished by the stark, fluorescent lights of the Academy's halls. This was the training arc, before the training arc, the brutal, unglamorous process of being broken down to his component parts. And then, he met the man who would become his anchor. He was known only as the captain, a man whose very presence seemed to warp the space around him. He wasn't tall, but he stood with the immutable gravity of a mountain. A single, jagged scar traced a path from his brow to his jaw, a permanent record of a story no one dared to ask about. His eyes, the color of weathered steel, didn't just see you, they seemed to look through you, assessing the structural integrity of your very soul. He was the archetype, the grizzled veteran, the retired legend, the master Roshi to Ryuji's Goku, the Jiraiya to his Naruto. Their meeting was not dramatic. It was in a hangar, long after classes had ended. The captain watched from the shadows as Ryuji, for the third night in a row, furiously, desperately, tried to correct a flawed stabilizer design, his hands smudged with grease and his eyes wide with frustration. He wasn't doing it for a grade anymore, he was doing it because he had to, because the dream demanded it. "You're fighting the metal," a gravelly voice cut through the silence, making Ryuji jump. The captain stepped into the light, his shadow stretching long and imposing. "You're trying to force it to obey you. That is the way of a brute." He picked up Ryuji's wrench, his movements economical and precise. A true pilot, a true engineer, does not command the machine. He listens to it, he converses with it. You learned the wind on your bluffs, didn't you? You felt its flow, its pressure, its whims. This, he said, tapping the fuselage, is simply a more concentrated, more volatile kind of wind. Stop trying to be its master. Strive to be its partner. And so, the real forging began. The captain's training was less about equations and more about philosophy. He had Ryuji spend hours just sitting in a cockpit, eyes closed, learning the hum of its systems, the feel of every switch and lever until it became an extension of his own body. He forced him to disassemble and reassemble engines blindfolded, to build a kinship with the machinery through touch and sound alone. The lessons were grueling, often infuriatingly simple, and punctuated by the captain's cryptic, koan-like wisdom. Smooth as fast. The sky does not forgive hesitation. A sharp mind is a better shield than a thick hull. He was not a kind teacher. He was a whetstone, and Ryuji was the blade. He applied relentless pressure, grinding away at the boy's insecurities, his clumsy techniques, his ego, until all that was left was a core of polished potential, sharp, focused, and ready. The captain saw the raw, untamed spark that the other instructors had missed, not just talent, but an innate feel, a potential for symbiosis between man and machine that could not be taught. He wasn't just building a pilot, he was awakening a legend. The captain's forge had tempered him. Ryuji was no longer the raw, uncertain boy from the village. He was a blade, honed and sharp, humming with a newfound confidence. He moved through the academy's halls with purpose, his name climbing the rankings, his intuitive fusion of feel and technique beginning to yield spectacular results. He was ready, or so he believed. Every great shonen arc needs its rival, a mirror held up to the protagonist that reflects not who they are, but their most terrifying insecurities. For Ryuji, that rival was Kaito Ren. Where Ryuji was fire and instinct, Kaito was ice and calculation. A prodigy from a legendary lineage of pilots, Kaito was grace personified. His movements were efficient, his solutions elegant, his performances flawless. He was the star of the academy, a figure of cool, untouchable perfection. And he viewed Ryuji's passionate, almost feral style not as innovation, but as undisciplined chaos. Their rivalry was the talk of Tengan, the clash of two opposing philosophies of flight. The setting for their confrontation was the Grand Sky Trial, the Academy's most prestigious competition. It wasn't a simple race, it was a brutal gauntlet through a simulated combat zone, a test of speed, strategy, and resilience under extreme G-forces and system failures. The entire student body, the instructors, even high-ranking officials from the Aerospace Defense Force, were watching. This was Ryuji's chance to prove his worth on the biggest stage, to validate the captain's faith and silence every doubter. The trial began, and for a while, it was a breathtaking dance. Ryuji, in his custom-built, Zephyr, unit, flew with the wild, unpredictable beauty of a storm. He took risks, using thermal drafts and vortexes the simulators hadn't even predicted, pushing his machine in ways that made the engineers gasp. Kaito, in his pristine, Avalon, craft, was a master of the textbook, executing perfect, energy-efficient lines, his every move a testament to cold, hard logic. They were neck and neck, a blazing comet against a guided missile. Then came the crucible. The simulation generated a catastrophic system failure, a massive, sudden pressure loss in the cockpit. For a pilot, this was the ultimate test of nerve and procedure. Kaito's response was instantaneous and perfect. His hands flew across the console, initiating a series of countermeasures with machine-like precision, his breathing steady, his craft stabilizing within seconds. Ryuji, however, froze. It was only for a second, a single, paralyzing heartbeat. But in the sky, a second is an eternity. The terror wasn't in the failure itself, but in the cacophony of screaming alarms, the blinding red lights, the violent shudder of his beloved Zephyr. It was chaos, the antithesis of the flow state he lived in. His instinct, his greatest weapon, failed him. He fumbled, overcorrected, and sent his craft into a violent, uncontrolled spin. He didn't just lose, he crashed, spectacularly. The Zephyr, the partner he had built with his own hands, skidded across the simulated tarmac in a shower of sparks and tortured metal, coming to a broken, smoking halt at the feet of the watching crowd. The silence was deafening. The aftermath was worse than the impact. As he was pulled from the wreckage, humiliated and unscathed, he saw it. Not pity in the eyes of his peers, but confirmation. They had always thought he was a reckless amateur, and now he had proven it. He saw the disappointment, carefully hidden but unmistakable, in the captain's steely gaze. And worst of all, he saw Kaito. There was no gloating, no triumphant smirk. There was nothing, just a brief, dismissive glance as Kaito turned away, as if Ryuji were a minor, insignificant obstacle that had already been resolved. That utter, complete indifference was a more devastating blow than any insult. The dream was shattered. The confidence forged by the captain was exposed as a brittle facade. He was not a blade. He was still just a boy from a small village, and the sky, it seemed, had finally and decisively rejected him. This was his darkest hour, the moment the music swells and then cuts out, leaving only the sound of a broken spirit and the chilling question, how do you fly when your wings have been utterly, publicly, and definitively torn away? The world had gone monochrome. In the days that followed the Grand Sky Trial, Ryuji was a ghost haunting the halls of Tengan Academy. The whispers followed him, a constant, hushed soundtrack to his failure. He avoided the hangars, the simulators, the bluffs, any place that smelled of sky or ambition. The dream that had once been a blazing sun was now a cold, dead star in the void of his chest. He was prepared to fade away, to become a cautionary tale, to return to Kaze no Sato with his head bowed, the boy who reached for the heavens only to be cast down. But the bonds he had forged, his Nakama, would not allow it. A care package arrived from home, filled with Kenji's family's dango and a simple, heartfelt note, the wind on the bluffs misses you. We miss you. Then, Yuki found him, not with pity, but with a quiet, fierce conviction. She didn't speak of the crash. Instead, she handed him a worn, leather-bound journal. It was filled with his old sketches, every one she had saved from their childhood. You didn't look at the sky and see a problem to be solved, she said, her voice steady. You saw a song to be joined. Don't let them make you forget the melody. The final piece came from the captain. He didn't offer comfort or a pep talk. He dragged Ryuji, kicking and protesting, back to the wreckage of the Zephyr. The machine was a skeleton, a corpse of twisted metal and severed wires. Look at it, the captain growled, his voice like grinding stone. Your partner is dead. Did it die because the sky was too cruel? Or did it die because its pilot forgot how to listen? The question was a lightning strike in the darkness. The failure wasn't in his hands or his instincts, it was in his spirit. In the pressure of the moment, faced with Kaito's flawless perfection, he had abandoned his own truth. He had tried to be a calculator when he was born to be a composer. He had stopped conversing with the machine and had tried to command it. This was the awakening. This was the moment the protagonist, stripped bare and broken, finds a power that transcends technique. Not a new super mode or a hidden genetic ability, but the simple, unbreakable resolve of the human heart. Ryuji's hands, which had trembled with shame, now clenched into fists of determination. A new light ignited in his eyes, not the dreamy spark of old, but the hardened, focused gleam of tempered steel. He asked for one thing, a second chance. Not in a competition, but in a real, high-stakes emergency. A severe storm system was grounding rescue operations for a freighter in distress. It was a suicide mission, a chaos of wind shear and thunderheads that no sane pilot would enter. It was the perfect stage for his rebirth. When the call came, he didn't hesitate. In a patched-up, rebuilt Zephyr, he flew not against the storm, but with it. He didn't fight the turbulence, he rode it like he'd ridden the winds of his childhood bluffs. He didn't see the screaming instrument panel as a threat, but as a desperate conversation from his partner. He was no longer just a pilot, he was the nexus of the bond with his machine, the trust of his friends, and the harsh lessons of his master. He was the calm at the center of the hurricane. He succeeded where others had failed, guiding the rescue craft through the maelstrom with a series of intuitive, breathtaking maneuvers that defied every flight manual. There was no trophy, no ranking. His reward was the silent, respectful nod from the captain, a nod that held more weight than any applause. It was the look in Kaito's eyes from across the tarmac. No longer indifference, but the sharp, focused acknowledgement of a true rival. Goto Ryuji had not just triumphed over a challenge, he had triumphed over himself. He had learned that a legacy is not built on unbroken victory, but on the strength with which you rise from a crushing defeat. His legend was cemented not in a sterile arena, but in the heart of a storm, proving that the most powerful force in any universe is not perfection, but an unbreakable will, forged in failure and tempered by the bonds of the heart.